Max Verstappen's 2025 ambitions now amount to just having good weekends here and there after Red Bull's limitations were brutally exposed by a new low point. We've lost count of the number of times Verstappen has said he's not in championship contention this year, but with only 10 races remaining it looks impossible for him to win a 5th straight title. Finishing 9th on merit in the Hungarian Grand Prix was an incredibly limp way for this team to sign off for the summer break. Okay, this race wasn't exactly good for Verstappen a year ago either, but it showed how far Red Bull's fallen from its peak. Verstappen is now 97 points behind championship leader Oscar Piastri, and if anything he's more likely to be jumped by George Russell for 3rd in the standings than defend his title, with Mercedes driver now just 15 points back from him, and Red Bull's one-car team status means it's absolutely nowhere in the Constructors' Championship. Hungary continued a miserable recent trend, hence Verstappen's reduced expectation for the rest of the year, which says everything about the bad place Red Bull's found itself in. Red Bull had already recognised its bleak trajectory and outlook a little while ago, hence moving to axe team boss Christian Horner mid-season, and Horner's replacement Laurent Mekies says the team is not underestimating how much work it faces. But what happened in Hungary did catch Red Bull and Verstappen off guard, so the biggest lingering problems might be worse than they thought. Even Verstappen couldn't bail Red Bull out from a weekend that never really got going, as his worst qualifying result of the season led to his worst on-track finishing position. Spain was a worse classification in 10th, but that was because of a penalty after he finished 5th on the road. From the very start, Red Bull was in trouble in Hungary. Both Verstappen and teammate Yuki Tsunoda, who was knocked out in Q1 but was actually very close to Verstappen in terms of lap times all weekend, complained of a lack of all-round grip. And no matter how much Red Bull changed, Verstappen said nothing really gave a direction, something technical director Pierre Vacher was also baffled by, which explains why there was no repeat of the turnarounds that Verstappen and Red Bull have pulled off at other times this year. Both Verstappen's victories in 2025 have actually come after tricky starts to the weekend. In Japan, for example, Verstappen came from a difficult place in practice to secure a shock pole position and win the race. He also struggled on Friday at Imola, where he was able to split the McLarens in qualifying and win again. There was no such reprieve in Hungary. The problem was that Red Bull never really worked out what its problem was, and Verstappen said repeatedly that if they knew, we would have changed it already. So while Hungary was never going to be Red Bull's strongest weekend, Verstappen said no one expected it to be as bad as it was. Red Bull was brutally exposed by the demands of the Hungaroring's long medium-speed corners in terms of aerodynamic performance and how much those corners ask of the rear tyres. Even a qualifying lap requires tyre management in Hungary, which makes the setups even more compromised than usual. Red Bull's car still has such a narrow operating window that when it has to tailor it to certain speed ranges, it can easily get lost. And in a bid to find a workable compromise between rear tyre protecting understeer over a qualifying lap and decent long run duration, the car balance could easily drift into an area where Verstappen feels he doesn't have enough front ends to rotate the car. Much of what the drivers and team said in Hungary came down to not switching the tyres on, indicating that to set the car up for what the Hungaroring needs, mechanically it was missing something in getting the tyres in the optimal working range and keeping them there. That's why Red Bull was struggling in low and medium speed corners, where the mechanical grip from the tyre bonding to the track is more critical. But it was also no coincidence that this weekend included Verstappen speaking longingly about a trait he's seen in the pace-setting McLaren. McLaren looks after its tyres very well, but Verstappen's intrigued by more than that. McLaren excels on tracks with medium speed corners, and its team boss Andrea Stella had pinpointed that as one of the reasons it was so strong at the Belgian Grand Prix, for example. Verstappen says that McLaren's medium speed performance is incredible compared to everyone else on the grid, and Mekies said where they're killing us on most tracks is the medium speed corners. Verstappen's pinpointed how strong the McLaren's front end is in such corners, which are in a fairly wide speed range from around 95 to 135 miles per hour without losing the rear, and says that's something that we have to try and achieve. That's why in Q2, the most relevant session in terms of outright pace, Verstappen lost more than 0.2 of a second to the fastest McLaren in pretty much 3 corners, the long right of turn 5 and the left-right elongated S's after the chicane. Another 0.1 went in the final corner, with the rest of the gap explained by McLaren's strength in slower corners, although in extremely slow corners like turn 1, it's more equal. Unsurprisingly, the only places Verstappen was fractionally faster at all were the track's 2 high-speed turns, the turn 4 left-hander at the top of the hill at the start of the middle sector, and the turn 11 right-hander at the end of it. The problem with Red Bull being strongest at high speed is that F1 cars spend less time in high speed corners than in medium and low speed ones, and medium speed corners are the most common on the F1 calendar too. That is why McLaren's focus started to shift with how it prioritised its aerodynamic development. Think back to its surge to the front in 2023, and it was mainly prolific at higher downforce tracks, Silverstone, Suzuka, Losail and Interlagos being good examples. It could still be strong at other venues, such as in Austria and Singapore, but was half a minute behind in Hungary, got battered at Zandvoort, and struggled at circuits where there were more aerodynamic and mechanical trade-offs to be made, for example Spa, Monza and Mexico City. That showed how much work McLaren needed to do to make its car more of an all-rounder. Generating downforce and controlling airflow in different corner speeds and types is, to state the obvious, very complicated. Different speed ranges come with completely different aerodynamic demands. It is immensely complex to anticipate how the car will react in different yaw angles, which are defined by the cornering angle and how much steering lock is required to steer through the corner. Different speeds dictate different steering angles, which then change the yaw from inside or from outside, and the speed and direction in which air flows to the car. That's before factoring in what impact the wind can have, for example. So a car would work very well in high speed but not in low speed, because the car's aerodynamics are robust with yaw from outside. And it's not just yaw angle, it's the yaw rate, which is the speed of the car's rotation. And in this generation of F1 car, another key factor is ride height. Generally in the low speed, the car runs slightly higher, but at high speed the ground effect pulls the cars very, very close to the ground. That fundamentally differentiates car performance at high and low speed as well. And that's not just our uneducated view on vehicle dynamics, all of that is literally how Stella explained it to us at the start of 2024, when we asked him about the challenge of generating downforce at different speeds. So it's interesting revisiting that now in the context of Red Bull struggling with a specific speed range and McLaren having excelled in mastering it. And this was a major project for McLaren through 2023, which shows how far back its aerodynamic development process goes and helps explain why it is not a simple thing for Red Bull to suddenly revise its understanding of this, let alone address it. Verstappen's form, like Red Bull's, has regressed as the season has gone on. He averaged nearly 18 points per event over the first 7 Grand Prix, the equivalent of a second place each time, which is impressive considering the strength of the two McLarens. In the 7 events since though, his points average has dropped to 12.2, equivalent to 4th, which feels more in keeping with Red Bull facing an ever bigger battle to even be second best. The yo-yoing form of Mercedes and Ferrari has made for an erratic fight behind McLaren, but apart from Monaco, Red Bull stayed in around the same area. That, unfortunately, is part of the problem. It has bought a lot of upgrades in that time, but is still completely at the mercy of track characteristics. Get to a circuit with high-speed corners and Verstappen is a real thorn in the side of the McLarens, usually because he's hustling a car trimmed out in terms of wing levels, as it was at Silverstone or in the sprint race at Spa. Get to pretty much anywhere else though, and it's damage limitation mode. That's disappointing considering how prolific Red Bull's development has been. It has brought new front wings, side pods, floors and rear wings over the last few months. Pretty much every aerodynamic surface has had not just one but multiple updates. And yet Verstappen says the car is still not where I need it to be and is limiting me from going fast. There is a degree of realism within Red Bull about this because the upgrades have worked and made the car faster, but they have not cured underlying limitations. Red Bull admits that the gains haven't been enough and don't fix the balance problems either. That's why the car is still capable of being both slow and hard to drive, which is so frustrating for Verstappen when it's at its worst, such as in Hungary. Part of the problem is that McLaren keeps moving the goalposts. It has set the pace since the start of the year and not exactly stood still. In fact, Stella said in Hungary that people may have missed just how much McLaren's own car has improved across 2025. Over the past 2 years, McLaren waited and brought big aerodynamic packages that were more obvious because it was still on such a steep development curve. Now it's in a more conventional phase of bringing various small updates across many races, and not just aero ones either. It's tweaked its front and rear suspension in different ways to improve driver feeling and traction, to mitigate what few weaknesses its car does have and accentuate the positives even further. And that's been tough for Red Bull to keep up with, let alone outdevelop. Red Bull's real focus now is on the future. Verstappen is locked in for 2026 and has continued to hint he's happy to stay for longer if Red Bull convinces him it is the right place to be. His contract runs to 2028, albeit with exit clauses, and Verstappen loves the idea of being at Red Bull for his entire career. Convincing Verstappen will come down to car performance, especially now things are more settled behind the scenes. The Horner era became dominated by infighting and tension at management level. Red Bull's parent company and the likes of Helmut Marko can pretend there are and have been no factions all they want, but if that was the case, Horner wouldn't have been surprisingly sacked. The reality though is that Red Bull felt the team needed new and focused leadership, and it has to be said that Verstappen has responded pretty well to the change, even if he wasn't calling for it himself. While he hasn't wanted to say too much about how things have changed after Horner, he responded enthusiastically when we asked about Mekier's arrival as team boss being an opportunity to push for changes there may have been resistance to in the past. He said that is absolutely the case, and while it is early, he likes how Mekies is working, calling him very motivated and saying he is constantly asking the right questions. Verstappen knows there will not be much benefit from that this year, but hopes that in the coming year or 2 years we can really see his touch to the team, and he's very excited for that. Until then though, Verstappen needs to see out a season in which Red Bull just will not be as competitive as he wants, and it would be particularly bad if the team finds an even lower point than Hungary.